The financial criminals steal money of many innocent people.
The pension fund is being dissolved.
They thought what these weak individuals will do against them. Unaware, some old men are on their way to completely destroy them. Welcome back to Paramount Recapped. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me.
I did it.
The film kicks off with Joe, an older man, heading to Williamsburg Savings Bank to meet Chuck, the bank manager. Chuck informs Joe that he's falling behind on his payments and will have to put his house up for mortgage soon. Joe, who shares his home with his daughter and granddaughter, refuses to accept this. Suddenly, a group of robbers bursts into the bank and starts a heist. The robbers keep their cool, instructing everyone to get down and remain silent. Joe, trying to process his financial woes, mutters to himself, if they're robbing the place, maybe I should ask them for a loan. Their interest rates are probably better than this bank. Chuck makes a noise, grabbing the attention of the gang leader, who walks into the room where Joe and Chuck are. After hearing about Joe's financial troubles, thanks to the bank, the leader surprisingly calms him down. Joe notices the leader has a Mongol warrior tattoo on his neck, but all he can think is, great, even criminals have cooler tattoos than me. Soon after, the robbers make their getaway with bags of cash. Next, Joe finds himself at the police station, recounting the whole incident to FBI agent Hamer. He tells Hamer about the tattoo and even suggests that watching more Law and Order might help speed up the investigation. Hamer rolls his eyes, explaining that real-life crime solving isn't as fast as TV makes it seem. Joe smirks and says, well, that's disappointing. I thought you'd wrap this up before the commercial break. Later, Joe's family takes him home, where he recounts the robbery to his granddaughter. She's absolutely fascinated by the ordeal, thinking it sounds exciting. Her mom quickly shuts it down, telling her there's nothing thrilling about being part of a heist. The next day, Joe meets up with his old pals, Albert and Willie. They read about the robbery in the newspaper. Albert jokes that the only real loser here is the insurance company and that the robbers will probably never be caught. Joe, still intrigued, can't stop thinking about how quick and skilled the robbers were. Later, Willie shows Joe a letter they received from their old employer, Wexler Steel, detailing their pension debt. In the following scene, the three attend a meeting where their old company's manager informs them that the business is moving to Vietnam due to rising costs. Joe, holding up the pension debt letter, says, so, you're saying our pensions took a one-way ticket to Vietnam? Guess it's having a better vacation than I ever will. The manager breaks the news that their pensions are frozen, which means they've essentially lost them. Joe and his buddies are livid. After the meeting, the trio heads to their usual cafe, but without their pensions, they're struggling to make ends meet and can barely afford a decent meal. Joe, still fixated on the bank robbery, starts discussing it with his friends. You know, Joe says, at least the robbers got something out of that bank. All I ever got was overdraft fees. Later that night, after having dinner at Albert and Willie's, Joe heads home, only to find a default notice from the bank. He's horrified. He's going to lose his home in 30 days, which would leave him, his daughter, and his granddaughter without a roof over their heads. Joe mutters to himself, guess I should start packing, or maybe just rob the bank sooner. The next scene jumps to Willie at the hospital, getting a checkup. His kidney condition is getting worse, and the doctor advises him to seek a transplant from a family member. Time's running out for Willie, and without a kidney transplant soon, things could turn fatal. When Willie gets home, he video chats with his daughter and granddaughter, venting his frustration about not seeing them enough. I swear, he says, if I don't get this transplant, I might have to haunt you guys just to spend more time with you. Meanwhile, Albert is teaching saxophone to a young student, while the student's grandmother, Annie, flirts with him. She's got more moves than the saxophone lesson. Later, Joe's granddaughter proudly shows him her test paper with an A grade. She reminds him of his promise to get her a puppy if she excels in all her subjects. Joe's eyes widen, right? I'll get you a puppy or maybe a goldfish. How do you feel about goldfish? The following day, the group gathers to celebrate Willie's birthday at their senior residence. Albert gives Willie a wristwatch with a photo of his granddaughter on it. Then Joe drops the big idea. He suggests they rob a bank. Albert and Willie are shocked at first, but Joe argues that the bank is about to take his house and that the financial system is ruining lives. He even jokes, worst case, we go to jail. 3 meals a day, no mortgages, and no annoying phone calls from telemarketers. Sounds like paradise. That night, Willie gives it some thought and calls Joe, agreeing to join the heist. I mean, why not? Willie says, I'd love to tell my grandkids their grandpa was a criminal mastermind. When Joe pitches the idea to Albert, Albert initially refuses. I don't know, Joe, he says. I've seen Ocean's 11, and we don't exactly scream George Clooney. The next day, Albert drives Joe and Willie to a supermarket to grab some chicken corn blue. While Albert waits outside, Joe and Willie head in and start shoplifting. Albert, getting nervous, goes in to check on them and runs into Annie, who just happens to work at the store. Joe and Willie manage to steal a few items and make a run for it, but they're spotted by a security guard. In a desperate move, Joe grabs an old woman's shopping basket, because if you're going to steal, you might as well go for the granny's groceries. And he and Willie manage to get away, while poor Albert gets caught by another guard. Joe and Willie barely avoid crashing into a bus during their escape from the grocery store, but still get caught. After their release, Albert, embarrassed by the fiasco, leaves them behind. Realizing they need a better plan, Joe seeks help from his ex-son-in-law, Murphy, to find a criminal for advice. Meanwhile, Albert reconnects with Annie, and they enjoy a fun evening together. Later, Albert reconciles with Joe and Willie at a cafe, where they discover their old company is using their retirement funds to pay bills, with Williamsburg Savings Bank handling the debt, meaning their pensions are gone. Frustrated, Albert agrees to join the bank heist.
I'm in.
They contact a criminal named Jesus, who agrees to help in exchange for 25% of the loot. With Joe facing eviction, Jesus trains them for the heist. They create a plan, pick a getaway vehicle, and set up alibis during their lodge's carnival. 20 days later, they execute the robbery. Willie drives a bus to the bank, and the heist goes smoothly until a little girl offers Willie a doll, allowing a clerk to alert the police. Willie collapses but recovers as the girl removes part of his mask, spotting his granddaughter's picture on his watch. Chuck, the bank manager, tries to stop them, but Joe fires back, terrifying him. The trio escapes with $2.3 million and later celebrates at a fancy restaurant where Albert plays the saxophone. However, the fun doesn't last long. On their way home, Willie collapses due to kidney failure. The next day, FBI agent Hamer reviews the footage and identifies Willie as someone around 60 years old. Meanwhile, Joe and Albert rush Willie to the hospital and learn he urgently needs a kidney transplant. At the same time, Hamer visits the grocery store and sees surveillance footage of Albert, noticing the similarities between him and the bank robbers. The next day, the police arrive at Albert's home, and they quickly find Joe and Willie, arresting all three on suspicion of the robbery. During questioning, they stick to their rehearsed alibis. A flashback shows how Joe swapped hats with someone at the carnival. Willie changes disguise at a haunted house, and Albert slipped out of a public restroom to catch a bus. Later, the trio goes to Jesus for help laundering the money. To try to catch the thieves, Hamer sets up a police lineup with the trio, hoping a child witness will identify Willie. But when she sees the watch on Willie's wrist, she decides not to point him out, leaving Hamer without a lead. A few days later, Joe and Jesus meet at a cafeteria, where Jesus gives Joe a puppy. He then surprises Joe by revealing that he was the mastermind behind the robbery Joe witnessed earlier, and hands him $2.3 million, refusing to take the money back. Jesus also shares that the tattoo Joe noticed was a fake, meant to throw off the police. Right then, Hamer arrives at the cafeteria to return Joe's wallet, which he had left behind. After a brief chat, Hamer plays with the puppy in the cage, where Jesus has hidden the cash. The conversation ends when the puppy nips at Hamer's finger. Joe calmly takes the cage and leaves with Jesus and Hamer. Later, the trio sends a suitcase full of cash to help their friends, co-workers, and lodge members. Not long after, Albert donates his kidney to Willie. In the final scenes, Albert marries Annie, and the trio celebrates their new wealth.